My name is Ruby Fremont, and I'm a leadership guide, coach, mentor, speaker, and podcast host. And today on Leadership and Loyalty, I'm going to be talking about your potency, how to show up authentically in a world that wants you to be different, and how to take a stand in a meaningful way as a leader in the era of social media.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to up-level your leadership? At this point, there seems to be a lot of folks, including leaders, who are just trying to survive. But focusing on being able to survive makes it impossible to thrive. If you feel for any reasons that you're having to water yourself down, imagine what would really happen to you and to your business, to your leadership, to your joy, to your life in general if you operated at full potency. Well, stay tuned because that's what you're going to discover on today's show. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I am the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more about me, you can simply go over to dovbaron.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our live 2-hour Dragon Leadership trainings that you're now being made available to you. Imagine being in a virtual classroom where I personally will walk you through the techniques and the strategies that I previously only offered to top CEOs, C-suite executives, high-level entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers. Well, now you have the opportunity to go over to dovbaron.com, click on that menu button, and there you'll see 2-hour live training. You can join us. In fact, you can even get access to past episodes like ethical persuasion, becoming a meaning-driven leader, resilient leadership in times of chaos, and many more. Just go over to dovbaron.com now and secure your seat. And also remember that you can chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and LinkedIn groups. Just go onto those sites and have a look. As always, we want to thank you for joining us. And remember, you can catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you tune into podcasts. If you're a regular listener, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with a potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners over time. And we are honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. As a leader, we are often given metrics by which we are supposed to measure our success. However, forward-looking leaders, particularly millennial leaders, aren't willing to accept those restrictive measurements. These leaders are redefining success in the context of meaning. Again, it's not about work-life balance, it's about a work-life blend, meaning that you can play and be in your bliss at work. You can be at work and play at the same time while creating the results and the positive impact and change that you really want to see in the world. However, that's not possible while you are diluting yourself down to be more palatable or more homogenous version of yourself. Our guest today says that in order to wield meaningful influence and to have both the ability and capacity to achieve meaningful results and operate, you have to operate at full potency. But how can you do that? Well, stay tuned because that's exactly what we're going to find out, because our guest on this episode is Ruby Freeman. Ruby Freeman is not your average leadership coach nor mentor. She is a speaker who helps ambitious entrepreneurs own their full potency to bring their mission into the spotlight. As a catalyst for change, Ruby has helped hundreds of thought leaders build their confidence and catalyze their message, which has landed them on podcasts, stages, television, and front pages of newspapers across this country. She herself has spoken on stages around the globe to rave reviews. Ruby Freeman is the founder of Thought Leader Collective and the host of today's Thought Leader podcast. Please put your hands together and help me welcome the powerhouse named an inspirational woman by the Huffington Post in 2016 and fellow icon of influence at the 2018 New Media Summit, Mrs. Ruby Freeman!
That is by far the most potent, powerful, and incredible introduction I have ever received to any podcast, hands down. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome and well deserved. Thank you. So where we always like to start the show, it's really interesting because of who you are and what it is you do, but where we like to start the show in this world of influencers, whatever the heck that means, we want to know who is someone that we may not even know or maybe never even consider who's been a major influence on you and particularly on your leadership style.
Yeah, for me, it has been, I would say the number one influence on me and my leadership style has been my dad. Both on what to do and what not to do.
Sure.
If I may say that.
Absolutely.
And because of watching him my entire life as the leader that he is, and also straddling that old paradigm of leadership and seeing what worked for him and also what didn't work for him. But witnessing the passion that he brought into everything, that was something that always drew me in. Like, how can this man be so passionate about this thing that he's passionate about, that I'm not passionate about, but he's so passionate about that. I want that passion. I want that. I want to feel like that in everything that I do.
Where did you see that most evidently?
With my dad?
Yeah.
With how he approached his work. As a child, I saw so many people going into their 9-to-5s, going into their work, and it was always like this drudging, grudging kind of, let me just stumble into work, do my thing, and get back home. But for him, there was like an excitement to it. There was a bigger game. There was a bigger end goal. There was something, a vision that he was always moving towards that lit him up. And that was something that I wanted to feel towards something that was meaningful to me, but I wanted to feel that.
Was he an entrepreneur?
Yes, he was.
So do you know what was driving him?
For him, what was driving him was his meaning of success, which is being able to take care of his family and establish a name for himself, which is very important in our culture.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Very often people will say parents. And I remember being interviewed back in the 90s, actually in Saskatchewan, and somebody asking me who was a great influence on you. And they knew that I had traveled and studied with different spiritual teachers. So they were probably expecting some profound insight. And I said, my dad, and they go, oh, was your father a very spiritual man? And I go, no, he was an example of everything I shouldn't be.
Right.
It was like, he was a very powerful influence because he reminded me, like, I don't want to be that. Right. And I do believe with everything that we have, it's important to recognize that there are often people who have success, but it's not what you want. And we've been sold this idea that this is what success looks like, as I was saying in the intro about the metrics. And then, you and I are both very focused on meaning, which is so much different.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was something that was missing in my dad's life.
Yeah. Well, certainly in the context of you and how you see meaning. Yeah. So let's talk about where you've been, because since the birth of social media,
yes,
it seems like every man and his dog and every woman and their cat have claimed a title, not least of all coach, thought leader. You say that we need to operate at full potency, but for many that just seems like finding a way to be louder. right? In
Right.
a noisy world.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what you mean by that potency, as opposed to being louder or claiming some title the person knows nothing about, which I still love.
Right. Yeah, it's being operating at full potency is you being the absolute fullest expression of who you are. So that doesn't mean being the loudest version of yourself or being like someone else who might seem louder than you. It
Mm-hmm.
means you dropping into what makes you, your truth, your voice, the things that actually truly drive you, and owning that and bringing that to the surface and being unafraid to share those parts of you with the world.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is operating at full potency.
But I guess the question is, does that get interpreted as I should claim a stake that I know nothing about, which and you and I both know happens a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is not about making any sort of claim. This is about diving inward. So, a claim is something that is external of us. It's
Exactly.
saying, I am this thing. Whereas potency is something that you need to dive inwards to uncover, to excavate, to discover, perhaps for the first time ever, coming face to
Mm-hmm.
face with you in a world where we're so obsessed with the external image and how we want to be portrayed or perceived. This is about how you perceive yourself.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that was appealing about having you on the show, is that you and I have that in common, that
Mm-hmm.
we understand that, yeah, you've got to be out in the world and you got to have a message and et cetera, et cetera. But if you've not done the inner work, if you've not bothered to go inward, nothing is really going to have any substance to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the context of that, when we look at you, and for those of you who can't see, because we're listening to a podcast, Ruby is an attractive woman. She's a young woman. She's a leader. She's a woman of color, tattoos.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole bunch of labels and stickers we can put on you, as we could on me or anybody. But I think that oftentimes, again, we live in this visually represented world more than ever. I think that oftentimes that comes with a lot of misunderstanding and misinterpretation. I
Mm-hmm.
know that when people first meet me, we were talking about our friend Justin Schenk,
Mm-hmm.
and I was on his show and we were talking, and he said, yeah, when I first met you, I thought, oh, and this is what he said about me. He goes, oh, he says, you showed up, you've got your vest on, you look nice, you've got good hair and all this. And he goes, and I was like, oh, this guy's too much for me. And as you came over and you said something, he goes, and we all sat at the table, wet ourselves laughing, and suddenly it was all gone. And I think there's this, there's this perception of people.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the misconceptions of you in the context of, your titles, your labels, and all those things versus who you are and what you do?
Yeah, there's a lot of, I have to say, I deal with a lot of misconceptions.
I'll bet you do.
And, one of them is people underestimate my wisdom and what I have to offer, the depth of the work that I do, because you see me and you want to stick a label on me and you underestimate what I bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
And when people come to the table underestimating who you are, it's almost like they automatically mute anything that you have to say.
Yes.
So for me, that's been one of the biggest things that I've noticed, as well as, people think I'm younger than I am. I mean, I'm relatively young, but people think
Sure.
I'm younger than I really am. And then with that, there's the whole story of, well, you're too young to know anything. What do you know? So, and then of course, being a woman and being a woman of color, that comes with its own, beliefs, and because I also look quite ambiguous in terms of, well, what color is she, what is her background, where does she come from, that has like all this other confusion to it. And so I believe that generally people just underestimate the depth of the work that I offer in my experience, and for me, I don't look at that as something that that's a struggle. I look at it as a challenge. And
Mm-hmm.
I know that when people actually experience me, whether it's at a speaking engagement or at an event or through other people or through my podcasts, that's when they can understand and see past the physical appearances, which we as all human beings make judgments on. But yeah, it's once you experience me, you start to understand. And I think it's fair to say that in the world that we are all raised in, we're all making judgments of each other. We all do this, but it's our willingness to move past that first judgment to see what lies beneath.
You know, you just said something there that I think is really important, because this is my judgment, but my judgment statement is that there is this bullshit idea that we shouldn't be judgmental. And what I say to people all the time is, you can't survive if you don't judge. That is part of your human condition. Your brain is designed to keep you alive by judging. However, you don't have to stop at the initial judgment. You can pay attention and see what else there is, because often there's much more than comes to the surface. And I can clearly remember, I mean, I've been a speaker for 30 odd years, and I can remember when I started and I was in my 20s and walking around myself, not them, like with the judgment about myself that nobody's going to pay attention to me because I'm too young. And I can remember when I hit 50 thinking, oh my God, nobody's going to pay attention to me because I'm too old. You know, I mean, that judgment about yourself and others having about us is easy to go to as a way to actually dilute ourselves, as you would say, you know, to not be at full potency, as opposed to saying, here's your judgment of me. Fine. Now here's me, you know, and I love that. And I think it's an important thing for us all to do. And I love that you challenge people to take a deeper look.
Yeah, it's important. You know, I feel the same way about judgments. I did a whole podcast episode on this. Like, we all judge, and there's nothing wrong with judgments. It's what you do with the judgment after.
Absolutely.
Do you choose to be ruled by that judgment, or do you choose to let that judgment dictate then how you move forward, whether it's a judgment towards self or a judgment towards someone else? Or do you get curious about your judgment, right? Where is that judgment coming from? What can I see beyond this judgment?
Yeah, I fully agree. Now, one of the things that I know you're very focused on is redefining leadership. You and I had talked about this in our previous conversation. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the definition of leadership that's generally put out there, and how you're redefining it and what you're doing with your clients to redefine it.
So I like to describe this as a visual. So the old paradigm of leadership is always seen as the leader who stands on stage at the front of a room with an audience, and they're all, you know, listening to what this leader has to say, abiding. And yet things are deconstructing in that way in our world. And now what people are craving, and this is where I see leadership going and where it's moving, is the leader is now standing. There is no stage. The leader is now standing in the middle of the room amongst everyone, seeing eye to eye, being able to connect by being amongst them, by being with them, by leading with them, by standing with them. And in fact, not seeing an us versus them, but instead seeing a collective we. Because I feel that the biggest missing piece in leadership, and what I noticed in my dad too, is this idea that you need to be the authoritative figure. You need to do all these things, to establish yourself as this person that everyone needs to listen to. Whereas now it's more about who you're being and what you're embodying and what you represent, what you stand for. And people nowadays are more drawn to leaders when they're actually being the fullest expression of everything that they're here to say, do, and tell you to do. We don't want to just play a game of Simon Says. We want to see the living example of what it is that we want. And that's what we look to leaders for nowadays. And so this is where I see leadership being right now at this juncture in life, especially with everything that's been happening. And it's so important for us as leaders to really understand that this isn't about doing anymore. This is about who you're being.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's, I think that, I wrote about in Fiercely Loyal that one of the things I love about millennials is they're very large bullshit meters. And so they don't just simply take the order because you're the boss, and that you have to actually show up and be the thing you're talking about. I love that. At the same time, and I agree, that the leader has to be amongst us rather than separate from us. But again, coming back to this world of being in a social media environment, there's this shouting from the platforms, whether the platform is LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a lot of it is superficial. I'm, without naming any names, I remember see a lot of a particular, quote, thought leader who has a massive, insanely big following, who, in my judgment, fully owned, has the depth of a saucer of milk, but is a brilliant marketer. There's no doubt about it. And I fully respect the marketing. I do. Brilliant marketer, but really is a wonderful plagiarist, who doesn't seem to have any personal depth, because it's a regurgitation. And by the way, I don't think there's anything particularly new in anybody's stuff, but there's no depth, there's no, it's not evolved. You know what I mean? It's just like, well, let me stick my name on it as opposed to your name on it, and actually nick it. But with this amazing machine. So I know you help people to come to the fore in that world, as thought leaders, as leaders. How do you help them to make that distinction? Because there are people that you and I both know who are far greater depth and influence of what they could be, versus these people who have the machine, who, whether had money or whatever it was, or just happened to hit Instagram as it was starting to do the big hockey stick, versus, me going on there today, or anybody going on there today, like, now you got to slug just to get noticed. So what do you say to your folks around that kind of stuff? Because you must bump into that
all the time.
Imagine. Yeah.
All the time. I mean, social media is the number one marketing tool for everyone, and it's free for the most part, unless you do advertising. And there's a lot of power in it. But with that power, people lose themselves. And I think that there's a fight between fighting to be heard and seen, which causes people to show up in different ways, manipulating who you are and how you speak and what you look like, so that you can get noticed, versus the fight to really just be. And there's a huge difference, and there's a lot of fear in just being, because if I'm going to just show up and be who I am, then am I going to be loud enough? Am I going to stand out? Am I worthy enough? Am I good enough? And you start to compare yourself to everyone else in the feed, in the machine. And that brings up a lot. And so the work that I do with these leaders is let's first of all shift your priorities, because this isn't about being heard or being seen. This is about you first understanding who you are, seeing yourself, hearing yourself, acknowledging yourself, and then bringing that to the table. Because when we don't have that relationship with self, when we don't understand what it is that we actually truly offer, or what our voice really sounds like, or our tonality or our messaging, then when you show up on places like social media, it's so much easier to just regurgitate what everyone else is saying or doing, or acting like other people that you see in your feed who have more followers, which is not you. It's not who you are. And when like attracts like, the most basic way I can explain it, like attracts like. So if you're being like other people, you're not going to attract your actual ideal audience, or the people that you're meant to work with. You're going to attract a mixed pot of everything. But when you're standing in the full expression of who you are, you're going to start to attract those people who are really aligned to work with you, to be part of your community. And that may not mean that you're going to get the 1 million followers, but it will mean that you will gain success by the true meaning of success. And we don't need 1 million followers to create that success for ourselves. And I think that's a big illusion out there. There's a big illusion with social media that we need to get past. And so it's really shifting priorities and understanding that the thing that you're chasing is not really the thing that's going to get you the meaning that you really want.
So how did you do that for yourself? Sort of tell our listeners about your journey, because again, you come up in the social media world where it may be a false metrics, but nonetheless, people are chasing the likes and the followers numbers, and oh, I got 50,000 likes, or I got 2 million followers, or whatever it is. And you came up in that world, not just in the position you are, but even in the world you were in. Talk to us about that journey for yourself, which would have been, I imagine, I'm not saying it's true, I imagine would have been focused on the numbers because of what you did versus what you do now.
Yeah. So I had the benefit of growing up without social media and a lot of years without the internet. And so I feel like I'm able to look into the minds of millennials as well as ground myself in the humanness of it all. But once you get into social media, oh my God, it's so tempting. It's so tempting to chase the numbers. It's like social media is the machine that can eat away at your self-esteem in an instant, because you scroll and you start to compare. And for me, by the time I got into the personal development space as a coach, I had already put in quite a few years working on my own personal development, really uncovering my voice after being raised to really mute myself and to conform and to fit a certain expectation of what it means to be an Indian woman. And so prior to stepping into the personal development space, I was on my own journey of finding my voice. And so when I came into personal development and started coaching, I thought that I was confident. I thought that I was strong enough to stand in my voice, but social media made it very easy for me to distract myself from what it is that I wanted to do and focus on what it is that other people were doing. And I saw the numbers, and we only see what people show us on social media, and that part's easy to forget. And I was forgetting possibly the years that went behind these numbers, or the experience, or the lack of experience, and the falsehood of these numbers, right? Because the numbers aren't really real. So for a moment in my career, I was definitely chasing popularity and really surrounding myself with the quote unquote popular kids of personal development, and doing everything and anything to gain that popularity for myself. And I realized that within that popular scene, there was an emptiness. It was as if everyone in that space was chasing the numbers. And I remember there was this event I went to, and it changed everything for me. It was a private event at a popular influencer's home, an influencer in the personal development space. And I was really honored to be invited to this private, small, intimate event. And I went there, and within the first hour, I had 5 people come up to me, introduce themselves, ask me who I was. And right away, one of the very first questions, oh, what's your social media? And then they'd pull out their phones and look me up right there in front of me. This happened. And see my numbers. Back then, my numbers weren't as big. And then they'd be like, oh, cool. And then walk away, close off the conversation. And it was so surreal to me. Like I stood there. So
you only had value if you're above a certain number of followers on whatever the platform was.
And that experience shifted so much for me because I saw the emptiness. And it's like, you're not even willing to have a conversation if my numbers aren't good enough for you. I ended up leaving that party early, and that started this unraveling process, like this detachment from the numbers and a search for depth. And I realized that in order to find that depth, I needed to first find that depth within myself and shift my priorities from the popularity contest to the depth within myself and being able to start showing up confidently in my own power, in my own voice, in my own potency.
So I think you're absolutely right that the numbers are a new garish version of the bank account of rich kids.
Yes.
How much money does your dad have? Ooh, my dad has this much. Oh, I'm not going to talk to you. It's now how much, how many followers do you have? It's the same superficial crap that I have no time or patience for. But I really want people to grasp this, because I've talked about this a million times in a million different ways, but it's one thing to get it, right? Oh, I get it. This is superficial. Versus I get it. Now what? What is that? So we get the catalytic moment of these, we'll call them tea bags, because that's my nice way of saying things. These tea bags looking at the numbers and then realizing, Jesus, there's got to be more to it than this. And then realizing you have to do something. Because at that point, it's easy to go, well, I guess if I'm going to be in this game, I got to play the superficial game. Some people do that. Others go, I don't want anything to do with this. This thing sucks. And these people are idiots and I'm out. And they abandon ship. And then there are another group of people who you're a member of, who say something else. And I want to know about that step there.
Yeah. This is the step for me that took me from the external game to the inner game. Very much like having a relationship with or a friendship with anyone. It's diving inwards and to really get real with yourself about what you want. I had to get real with myself about what I valued. What is it that I value? What is it that's actually really important to me as Ruby? Not like the values that were projected upon me, not the values that other people are chasing, but what's really important to me? What does it mean to create success? I had to redefine success. I was raised to understand that success was about the money and the things that you have, everything that's external. Whereas for me, success was very visceral. It's a feeling. And I had to be able to identify that within myself. And then identify what are the things that I am really passionate about. So bringing it back to that what is the stuff that excites me? What is the stuff that I really just want to do versus I feel like I have to do because other people are doing it and this is how they've created success. So it's diving inwards and asking yourself those hard questions. Like, what is it that I value? What is it that's really meaningful to me? What does success mean to me? What am I chasing versus what I really want to go after?
Yes.
And for me, that looked like a process. This was definitely not something overnight. It was really, I was facing a lot of tough stuff within myself because sometimes, or not sometimes, I think we all run on autopilot for a very long time with the values that were projected upon us and the beliefs that were projected upon us. And at some point in your timeline, you need to stop and ask yourself what's real and what's false. And so I went through a period of really identifying what's real for me and what's false. And if this is false, then what's real? Because until you understand these things, you're going to continue to chase the wrong things.
Couldn't agree more. We are going to take a little break. And when we're going to come back with Ruby Freeman, we're going to talk about women in leadership and the importance of women in leadership. But for now, we're just going to take a little break because I want to let you know that this episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by our other podcast, Curiosity Bites. Curiosity Bites is the answer to the question, how do we bring people together who completely disagree? This is exactly what your mind and your soul have been craving. It's your chance to sit in on real and often intense conversations with some of the world's most interesting people, including astronauts, neuroscientists, philosophers, holy people, quantum physicists, skeptics, entrepreneurs, Grammy Award-winning entertainers, even some folks that you might think of as being, nice way of putting it, a-holes. But they're actually really fascinating people who can really enlighten and bring us together. Simply go over to dovebaron.com and find out how you can sink your teeth into Curiosity Bites. All right, we are back. Welcome back to the second half of the show with my guest, Ruby Freeman. Ruby is, she's a leader in a very different way. She's not your average leadership coach. She's not your average leadership mentor or leadership person for that matter. And she is, she's been the voice behind others. She's the one who's helped other people to come to the fore in their, what she calls in their full potency. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about that you and I had talked about in our previous chat, Ruby, was this understanding of women in leadership, because I really believe with every fiber of my being, the world needs more leaders. And one of the things we're seeing today, using the example of the pandemic, is the countries that have done best with the pandemic all have women leaders. Fascinating. How very interesting. And the ones that have done worst are the ones that have command and control leaders. Those are the ones that have done the worst. So talk to us about your thoughts on women in leadership. I personally would like to see more women in leadership. I'd like to see more people of not just necessarily binary sexually driven. I'd like to see people of color. I'd like to see more of a hell of a lot more mixed bag personally. But let's just talk about women first.
Yeah, it's interesting for this. I'd love to just go back to the days of the indigenous tribes, and a lot of this is actually still being practiced in places like South America, but the grandmothers are the ones that are revered, the ones that hold the most medicine, the ones that the wisdom keepers, the gatekeepers. And somehow down the line we've shifted into the patriarch, into the males holding the wisdom and the women being dismissed. And yet a lot of these tribes for example, in the Amazon are still holding these grandmothers as the wisdom keepers. And this has been going for centuries. And for a reason. We have the ability to empathize at a deeper level and to nurture at a different level. I do believe that we need both the male and female energies. However, right now we need to see more women in leadership because we have a different perspective to offer, and one that is needed right now. I think we can all agree, especially with the recent events of 2020, that there is a lot of polarity being brought to the surface, a lot of us versus them, a lot of this idea versus that idea. And in order for us to start uniting and coming together, there needs to be that compassion and the empathy and the ability to nurture the relationships versus create more divide. And this is where I see the power of female leaders coming in, is being able to bring that to the table.
So just for a moment, I'd like for you to speak to that, because many of our listeners, and I mean a very large portion of our listeners, are women in power roles. But one of the things I've spoken about on here many times is that one of the things that concerns me most is women in power roles playing men. As in they feel like they've got to be all yang and there's no room for their yin. And I think that's a mistake, but that's me talking. So tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, that was me, right? That was me for I would say my entire life up until probably 2018 really is when I started to realize something isn't working for me. Like, this is actually making me sick. I was burning out. I would have adrenal fatigue. Like, my physical body was falling apart. And with that, my emotional and spiritual self and my mental health, and something just wasn't working. And my entire life, here's what I saw. I saw my mom as the house mom, very traditional roles. My dad is the one who was working and keeping us happy with all the things. You know, my dad was the hustler, my dad was the doer, my dad was doing all this stuff, my mom was the nurturer. And so for me, because I really loved the idea of creating something for myself, oh, well, in order to be an entrepreneur, in order to be a leader, I need to be like my dad. I need to hustle, I need to do, I need to run at full speed all the time. And that wasn't working. And when my physical body started to fall apart, I was forced into a slowdown. I was forced into this state of slowing down, nurturing myself, which automatically drops you into feminine energy. And I went through a period where I really hated that, because to me, the feminine equated to like a weakness, like I wasn't good enough, like I wouldn't be able to compare with everyone else. But then I started to see the power in it, because I started to feel better and I started to get better. And as I started to heal myself, I noticed that there was also this, it felt better to be in that energy. And I started to show up in that energy. And I realized that there's a different sense of power that comes from that. And it's a power of attraction, but in a different way. It's being able to attract people into your orbit by just standing in your power. You know, for example, when I go on stage and I speak, I always speak barefoot. I will take my shoes off. I will head to the stage and speak barefoot. I don't move around a lot. I'm very grounded. I know there's a lot of very animated speakers. I'm not one of them. I am very animated with my voice, but not so much my movements. And I have always had people in the audience, no matter where I'm speaking, say to me, wow, there's so much power in your presence. And that's what I feel women miss when they drop too much in the masculine. You're missing your presence and the power of your presence alone. There's a beauty in that. There's an attraction in that. And that is also power. People are drawn to that versus this, you know, do yang energy, which we have enough of. You know, we have enough of that. There's more than enough to go around. What we need is the presence that allows us to, it almost gives people around you permission to let their guards down and to be in their own presence.
That's an interesting segue, because one of the things that I know that you say that you do with your clients is you help your clients discover their innate gifts, what those innate gifts are. Talk to us a little bit about that process, because I'm sure there are people listening who have a bunch of skills that they've learned, a bunch of things that they've become very proud of because they create results, but they may actually be, in my experience, often quite out of touch with those innate gifts. So talk to us a little bit about your process and how you help people to get to that.
Yeah. So, I mean, skills, we can all develop a skill. Any one of us can develop the skill to do anything we want, especially with the gift of the internet being what it is, and YouTube having how-to videos on every single thing known to man. So we can all develop skills, but the gifts that we have are the things that we often underestimate or undervalue because of this shiny object syndrome mentality that we all have. It's always more exciting to look at something else, or we see it modeled in someone else. So we see someone else doing a different skill and we're like, oh, that is going to bring me more value than this thing. You know, maybe your innate gift is really being a connector. You know, I've had a couple clients who their gift is in the connection. They're able to create connections that lead to really powerful things, but they underestimate that because that doesn't feel big enough or exciting enough as it would to say, hey, but I can help you speak on more stages. That's my gift. That feels more exciting. Don't chase the thing that feels more exciting, but rather, what is the thing that you're naturally good at, which is often the thing that we don't see because we're so gifted at naturally. And how can you find the value in that? Because I think when we have an innate gift, we don't see it because we're just doing it naturally all the time. And so when we doing something all the time, we don't see the value in it. We don't see the gift in it. We underestimate it. We focus on trying to find other things. And so it's about uncovering that thing that you're naturally able to do and be your stand-in, and then understanding what is the magic in that, what is the value in that.
Yeah, in my book, Don't Read This Unless You Want More Money, I called it genius blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
You have these genius blind spots because, as you said, they're natural. But can you walk us through a little bit of your process of, somebody shows up and says, I have no idea what my innate gifts are, my quote genius blind spot is. How would you help them to discover that? Because
Yes.
listeners are probably thinking, I wonder if I have them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a reflection process first. You have to go back and really reflect on, if you are in a position of service, for example, who are some of the people that you've served in the past, and what have you served them with? How have you supported them? What have you helped them achieve or do or be? For example, using coaching, the business coach who helped someone build their initial business.
Mm-hmm.
But was it actually the mechanics that you helped them with, like the website that you built? I'm sure you gave them a social media strategy and all these other strategies and tactics. Or was it the confidence to do the thing,
Mm-hmm.
to build the website? Like, what did you actually support them in doing, or who did you support them in being? And
Mm-hmm.
so going back in your timeline and understanding or being able to see these breadcrumbs of how you've really supported people.
Mm-hmm.
Because we like to look at the tactile things or the mechanics of things or the tools that we've supported people with, but what did you really do? Because if that person started their first business, they wouldn't have been able to do so without having uncovered that confidence in themselves. So you actually help them tap into that confidence. That's your gift.
Mm-hmm. So that people can get perspective, who would
Yes.
you say has, for people observing, who would you say has done a great job of that, of that they might go look at and go, okay, here's somebody who started out as this but has become that, and I can see that they're really in touch with those innate gifts and that they're living from that place. Is there somebody that comes to mind as a company or as an organization or as an individual who you look at and you go, there's somebody who really took that on?
Well, you can always look at me.
Who is that besides you?
Yeah, besides you, you're a great example in your I was about to say in your age range. I don't want to say in your age range, but in your
Thank you. Yes, I don't feel old now.
We joke around about age. It's okay. We're cool like that. But no, with where you've come from, because I think, I mean, in your age range and the leaders that you work with, it's very easy to be in that old paradigm of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Right there. And you bring, like, you talk about spirituality, you talk about yin. We were just talking about yin and yang energy. Like, who does that in your space? And you're not afraid to bring that into everything that you're doing, your podcast, your social media, your videos that you're putting out that are always so deep and introspective and insightful. Like, who talks about that? Whereas some people are going to be more focused on talking about the external.
Mm-hmm.
I see right now, I'm going to be honest. I think right now in the social media space, in the world of the millennial leaders, there's not enough of that. And so I'm actually struggling right now on the spot to think of one person that I want you all to look at, which is why I feel so called to do this work, because I'm just sick and tired of looking at fake crap on the internet all the time. And if anything, for me, because I've worked with a lot of these quote unquote leaders and have had some as my mentors, the deeper I go into my work, the more I see through their veils.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, without naming any names, there are some big names that I've worked with, and now I see them and I see how they're acting from their self-conscious ways. And if you're continuing to create monetary success for yourself in that way, then you're going to continue, and you're okay with that, you're going to continue to act in that way. I think if you see that you have the monetary success and creating your business the way you are and then showing up the way you are, but you actually are seeking more meaning, then you're going to start to show up differently. So I feel like I'm put on the spot and trying to find someone, because there is not one person that I look at and I'm like, oh, I want to be like them. This is a great example.
but that's important, Ruby, and I really appreciate your honesty with that. I think it's important because I think that oftentimes people are looking around for someone, and because there's not and I know there's not a lot of people out there, but there are a lot of noise out there that looks the part. That's what I was saying before when we started out. You know, I know I can think of somebody I know who has millions of followers, who does great videos and makes it look right. And I know that person has no substance. And that is upsetting for me, not because I'm pissed off at that person. I understand what they're doing. I have no problem with actually that they tap into a machine that works well for them. That's fine. My issue is more with the people who are looking for something.
Yes.
And they're going to what I call an empty shop. So they show up at a storefront that looks great, but when they open the door, there's nothing inside. It's an empty shop. Right. And that's a lot of what it is. And the window dressing is spectacular, you know, and I think that that's the challenge that you and I are both called to, is like, you know, we know there's nothing in this shop, so you actually got to put stuff in your own shop.
Yeah.
Right. And I think whether you bring that to the world or not, that's your choice. Yeah. But you got to fill your own, you know, put some contents in your own store first.
Fully agree. And I think, you know, the ones that I would say do stand out are the ones that don't have huge numbers. You know, maybe they only have a couple hundred. I mean, there are people that I follow on social media that have a lot of people I follow on social media have very small followings, and it's because of the substance of what they offer, the potency of how they show up. And I know a lot of people with very small social media followings and numbers, and they don't have the flashy anything, but they are hugely successful in every way of that you could word that, like the monetary success, the fulfillment, the happiness, all of it, the meaning. And I'm not saying that it's a choice between one or the other. It's not. No. But I'm saying when it comes to looking at people for inspiration, don't look at just the facade that they are presenting. Instead, look at how you're feeling when you see them. How do you feel when you read their content? How do you feel when you listen to their podcasts? Because there's going to be a different feeling between those that are really showing up in their authenticity and their truth and their potency, and those who are really the empty vessels and the shells. There's a very big difference in how you're going to be left feeling.
And I want to add to that by saying that oftentimes the people with the great storefront, when you watch their stuff or read their stuff, you're going to feel good. They're going to make you feel good. But the people who have depth, you're going to leave feeling questioning. You're going to leave with curiosity. You're going to leave even with some discomfort because you've had to look at something you probably didn't want to look at. And that's part of the reason you're pulled to the empty store with the nice window dressing, because it pats you on the head and tells you, you're all right. You know, you don't need to worry about anything. Everything's fine, but you're never going to look at your crap. And as a result, you're never going to really grow. And we know, it's not my opinion, it's psychological truth, is that you don't grow in comfort. You only grow in discomfort. You have to look in the places you don't want to look, whether you want to grow yourself, whether you want to grow your business, whatever it is. And if you are working with a coach, a mentor, a leader, following somebody who doesn't make you uncomfortable, you're with the wrong coach. That's it. Sorry, that's my opinion. You're with the wrong coach. You need to be with somebody who's going to kick your ass occasionally and still love you. That's different. Not talking about putting the boots to you, but kick your ass and say, listen, I love you. You're bigger than this. Let's stop playing small. Internally and externally. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. That's really important. Thank you so much for that, Ruby. As we come towards the end of the show, one of the questions I like to ask just at the end here is, I always like to ask, I want you to tell our listeners where they can find out more about you in a minute. But before we do, if you could sort of send one message to everybody listening to say, go do this in the next 24 hours in order for them to get a little more of what it is that you're saying, to integrate more of what it is you're saying, what would be that one thing that practicality you'd like to have them do?
Go offline for a minimum of 48 hours, a minimum. And I mean offline, like social media, off the internet, off everything. Just go offline, because we are so inundated with the input all the time that causes us to veer away from our truth, because we're comparing ourselves to others. And, you know, we say that we struggle in finding out who we are. Well, it's because you continue to look to others. You continue to compare yourself to other people. So go offline for 48 hours and see what comes up for you. Then start asking yourself some of the questions that Dove and I have been talking about on this episode, right? And sit with that. Give yourself that space and that freedom without all the external input and buzz and noise and static, so that you can really start to tune in to you and your voice and your truth.
Very simple, very powerful. Yeah, just to unplug from the external noise is extremely valuable in any context, not even in the context of just social media, but even if you don't know what it is, and you've probably heard me talk about it before, but doing a Vipassana, where you go to a silent retreat and you don't even talk to the people you're there with, and you just meditate and be, that can be extraordinarily valuable. Just taking the time to not watch anything and write in your journal, and write your own rantings and discover yourself. All that's really powerful. Thank you so much, Ruby. Please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you, all the things that you do, and all the resources that you have.
Yeah, well, definitely go listen to my podcast, Today's Thought Leader, on all podcasting platforms. You can head to my website, rubyfremon.com, and follow me on social media at I am Ruby on all platforms. And I also have a really cool text community. So if you want to text me if you have any questions about this episode, if you want to just drop your favorite insights, just text leader to 1-781-336-0160. Follow the instructions to input your information, and from there on out, you'll be texting directly with me.
Say that again slowly so that people can actually write it down.
I talk really fast. Text leader to 1-781-336-0160.
1-781-336-0160.
Yes.
Text the word leader.
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us, Ruby. It's been a pleasure and honor. We appreciate it. I hope you'll stay with us to the end.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Such an honor, such a pleasure always to have a conversation with you. I really do very much value our time together. We seem to talk about the things that no one else really talks about in this space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for you, dear listener, remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes by going to either our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. Because it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capacity. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com. Because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness in both individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everyone you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about what might happen in your life, in your leadership, and in your business if you suddenly operated at full potency. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.